September 19th, 2017 to order with roll call, please.
Kostler, Kostler,
Here.
McAlpine,
Here.
Kraus,
Here.
Betts,
Here.
Weinhammer.
Here.
Would you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'd like to get a general consensus to allow Trustee Cavelli to attend the committee of the whole meeting via teleconference.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Welcome back, Kim.
Thank you.
We're going to enter into discussion about parking. Eric, you going to lead this? Oh, you know what? I did skip over public comments. Is there anybody here that'd like to address the committee of the whole on anything that's unrelated? Oh, we're going to go to parking next. I skipped over the public comment. Sure, sure. You come on up now.
Hi, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Kelly Whistler. I'm at 690 Krenz Avenue. We're on the corner of Cary Algonquin, Krenz and Mary. So we have 3 streets on our sides. I was here at the village board meeting, the last village board meeting, with concerns of overnight parking for my daughter's LPN and RN skilled nursing. She has 24/7 care. She's on life support at home. She has a home-based waiver program that is state regulated and federally funded. And she also she has a doctor's note, and she's approved on many different levels to have the level of care in the home that she does. With that level of care, she needs nursing 24/7 with the life support and everything. So we have 2 to 3 different shifts, depending on the nurse, if they want to do a double shift or a single shift. And we are working, I'm hearing from Jacob tonight, he said that they're working on changing the village ordinance to make an exclusion. Am I correct? I saw you get in the microphone.
And to allow a permit here for your caregiver to park.
For the nurses or caretakers to park in the street overnight. He said that there was going to be contingencies. I have not heard the contingencies yet, but I do want to express a concern with the snow removal, or if it's snowing, that please keep in consideration that the nurses cannot leave my daughter's side to go move their vehicle, nor is there going to be another place for them to park if it snows. So if that is going to be a contingency, that's something that needs to be worked out. If it starts snowing at 2 a.m. in the morning, and I think it's 2.5 inches, then they have to move the vehicle. I'm not sure what we're going to do with that, because they can't leave my daughter's side, nor would they have anywhere else to park. So I'm just asking that you take that into consideration. Another thing that I'm requesting is an application for a handicap spot, handicap parking in front of our house, and I'm under the understanding that the Village of Cary does not currently have an application. We have submitted a demand letter. My lawyer has submitted, with Equip for Equality, has submitted a demand letter for those 2 things. One, to take another look at that ordinance and see if we can have an exception and maybe change the ordinance to accept caretakers overnight. But the other issue is handicap parking. There's no application right now currently, so I'd appreciate if that was looked into too. So we have assured parking for our handicap. We actually have 2 placards at our house, one for my daughter and then one for me, 2 different levels. I have a medical condition that requires handicap parking as well. So, and we unfortunately have one of the shorter driveways. We only have 2 spots in our driveway. So if the vehicle with the lift is there, only 1 vehicle fits there. So it would be nice to have, not nice, it would be appropriate to have at least one handicap parking spot in the front to assure that we can have accessibility. Is that it?
Okay. Thanks. We're going to have to get an update on staff and pay attention, and we'll get some of your questions answered for you.
We'll be following back up with you here, Kelly, as you and I discussed prior to
Okay.
the meeting. So appreciate your comments here. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Eric, Chief, are you going to talk about this? Tag team here.
All right, thank you, Mayor. Now, this evening, Chief Phil and I are going to be presenting some information from our research and investigation of the different options available with regards to some of the on-street parking, particularly some code amendments that could be considered in the future to address some different items that would include just some general corrections and clarifications in the code, some items with regards to one of the previous discussions we had on one particular neighborhood that is nearby an athletic field and the current confusion that's surrounding that phrasing of the particular restrictions. Parking restrictions that are temporary in nature for special events. They're not very clear in the code, and we have some proposed options for that as well. And then tying back to another previous discussion we had with the Committee of the Whole on parking requirements on very narrow streets, in particular roads that are less than 24-foot wide. In addition, as discussed previously, some other clarifications on wintertime parking restrictions and some of the other issues regarding exemptions, temporary exemptions for the overnight parking restriction and some other extended permit options. So this first slide, all it does is right now, it depicts the handout that was provided in the packet that showed the draft language to the code. So the colors there basically depict the current parking restrictions that are already in place. The blue areas are current restrictions that are there that are proposed to be amended, and the yellow ones are some potential new restrictions, not specifying whether it's one side, both side, or by term and time. That's just kind of the general scale of what's included in the narrative that you have. The first is regards to the general code corrections.
Some of the code corrections, and what you were provided in your packet was the entire parking section of our local ordinance, and anything that's underlined is additional language. Anything that's struck out is language that's existing language that'll be deleted. So some of that will correct some spelling errors that we found when we went through this. We did a very thorough review of the parking ordinance. Some of the restrictions that were in place are no longer needed. For example, restrictions around Maplewood School. There were some restrictions that were related to that we thought were best deleted, as the school is not being used, and they were specific for times when students were arriving or departing. And then finally, we fixed incorrect names or street names or limits. One that comes to my mind specifically is Tiger Trail in Glengarry. We struck Glengarry and made it Tiger Trail, so that's the reference for that street name. And then there was a parking restriction that used a reference of Three Oaks for Patriot, and they don't meet. So we changed the Three Oaks to Silver Lake Road because that was obviously the intent of the ordinance when it was passed to restrict parking on Patriot. This is related to the restrictions near the junior high and the high school fields. As you could see in the packet that was provided, the restriction was only in place when the fields were used, but the way that it was written was, it was or. So it could be either the Cary Junior High or the high school, and those restrictions were in place. Well, I challenge you to see how that would be fair for somebody if they were on Patriot and there's something being, some type of athletic event that was occurring on Cary Junior High's athletic fields. And the other part of that equation was that during the summer, we had an occasion where a resident made a complaint about parking in that area near Galway and Adair when there was an event occurring on the athletic field at the Cary Junior High. And when the officers responded, we enforced what was signed there, and there was some confusion because the resident didn't think that it applied to the residents there. So in that case, to try to clarify that and try to make it easier to enforce, we just changed that restriction from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. because it addresses both, it's primarily, when I did the research on this item, there were 3 specific ordinances that addressed that particular issue. One that was enacted in 97, one in 2002, and then one in 2006. So it started at the junior high. It was amended or added for the high school, and then there was more additions in 2006. So again, because it didn't make sense to have that restriction in place when people couldn't see the other athletic field, we thought it was best to make it more defined as it related to what the intent was. And the intent was obviously to restrict parking when there was athletic events occurring there. Neither, the junior high isn't lighted, so the 8 p.m. should be sufficient in regards to restricting parking in that area. And the high school football game starts at 7 p.m., so they would miss an hour of football if they were to park in that area. So we figured that restriction would be enough to keep or make it, not attractive to park on those areas of like Patriot Lane and things of that nature. The other thing it did is it was primarily meant to restrict only one side of the road, and that was related to both safety issues that were identified, and in, I believe it was 2002, a parking survey was done of area, I'm sorry, 2006, a parking survey was sent out to residents near Liberty Avenue, Liberty Court, Patriot Lane, and Patriot Court, of which 14 supported the restrictions during athletic events, and 3 did not support the restrictions. And so we wanted to make it more enforceable. In regards to temporary authority to post, we do this on more than one occasion, parades, the 4th of July, because Sterling Ridge and Patriot Woods, Brittany Woods has issues related to people parking in on those streets. We place temporary parking in those areas, and to be honest with you, we never had a lot of success in regards to enforcing those. Now we have an ordinance that backs that up. And these restrictions, which generally last no more than 48 hours, they don't. I mean, the restrictions that we usually put in place last less than 24 hours, but I believe that there's a situation in the ordinance that allows the public works personnel to restrict parking when there's street cleaning activities occurring.
This is with regards to another section of just cleanup in the code, and with regards to the practical application of no parking. Many of the collector streets in the village, roads like you see there, Three Oaks Road, Crystal Lake Road on the north side of town, they're striped in a manner where there's 2 through lanes and a bidirectional center turn lane. There's really no place delineating the road where someone would be able to park. However, and that is the intent typically of these roads that are high capacity for through traffic. But right now, the current code has no restrictions on eliminating parking on those roads. So if someone were to, in the heat of rush hour, in that location there on Three Oaks Road, park in that road, technically we couldn't enforce a vehicle owner to move that vehicle. So we would like to apply the additions to these codes to our major collector streets. In addition, we also propose that the same be said for the roads that are approaching those collector streets that are also striped in a similar manner. Just two examples. West Main Street, the west approach, approaching Carroll Algonquin Road, you see there in the left photo in the box. There's a striped out area for the turn lanes and the other through lanes. That segment is approaching a major street at a traffic signal. Right now, that block has no restrictions for parking. Same thing for that north leg by Cary Grove High School at First Street and Three Oaks Road. Same configuration. Again, someone could park there technically, but we definitely would discourage it from a traffic and safety perspective. Very narrow roadways, as we mentioned, this was a previous discussion. We have various types of roadways, the vast majority of them being more than 24-foot wide. And to a certain degree, those do have some challenges when cars are parked on both sides. At this time, at least initially, what we would recommend is that the roads that are less than 24-foot wide, so the very narrow streets, just as an example in the photo there, that road is about 18 feet wide. So when a car is parked on one side of the street, there is sufficient room for an emergency vehicle, school bus, garbage truck to pass through. Obviously, once you have cars parked on both sides of the street, whether it's directly opposite each other or adjacent to each other, you end up with a little bit of a slalom configuration. School buses, fire engines, police cars would not be able to pass through the roadway. So we would recommend that it be considered at least that these narrow streets be restricted to parking just on one side.
In regards to that, what we did do is we chose the hydrant side to be the side that we had the parking restriction on to allow easier access to the water supply for the fire department.
In a similar manner, this is in the center of town, east of Silver Lake Road, north of Route 14. These streets are, while not as narrow as that 18-foot example in the previous slides, these are also narrow enough to where we do have similar challenges with emergency vehicles and also with, there's a larger park in this neighborhood as well. So we also tend to get not only a higher number of cars parking on street, but they're also clustered together. So that stretch of roadway where the cars are parked together does make it even more challenging for emergency vehicles. So these are another areas we would recommend that the restriction to one side be considered.
Eric, can you orient people of where we're looking at here?
So the yellow areas would be where there's currently no restrictions for parking on both sides of the street. The street on the left side there where they terminate at is Silver Lake Road. The street at the north is Three Oaks Road. And the street at the southwest, or the bottom left, is it's also Silver Lake Road. The blue, there are current restrictions there, and we would just be amending them to be consistent with the locations in the highlighted in yellow.
And if you remember when we had a similar issue on Sunset and 2nd Street, and we looked at that, especially from the standpoint of the school buses navigating that area, when vehicles were parked on both sides, we ultimately did restrict parking on the one side of the street, and we chose, again, the fire hydrant side there. And things seem to work very well as it relates to vehicles traveling in that area.
Hey, Eric, where in the packet does it refer to this area? What page is that on?
I think it's the back side of 6 with the underlined. The underlined are the changes, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah. No, another one, Jim, I think.
Starts on 30.
Do you have this one here?
Yeah.
Yeah. So the
Oh, okay.
there's a first, actually, the first section 103205, and then it's subsection.
Yeah, I'll just
See-
personally say that this is a really good idea. I go through there all the time, and both sides of the street parking is causing a hazard on these yellow streets. People fly through there, and there's cars parked on both sides of the street, and one car goes down through the middle. And there are kids playing on both sides of the street all the time that could dart out. I like that a lot.
Thank you. Did you need it? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, some of these issues related to the current code restricts snowfall, parking on the street when there's snowfall of 3 inches or greater, but there was a time element associated with that, but it never said from when. So now that time element is defined in the current code, and that would be when either the Public Works Director or myself indicate that the restriction's in place, and it's 12 hours from that point that restriction is in effect. So we have to advise our record section in writing, could be an email, to say that the restriction's in effect, so that when we do issue any enforcement action or take any enforcement action, there's a definitive 12-hour span where the restriction was in place. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, and then, the last part here on this slide it references a software package called Frontline. In the past, residents would have to call into our dispatch center to request permission if they wanted to park overnight on our roadway during the periods of time when that was restricted. Currently, our dispatch center, CCOM, has purchased a software program called Frontline that allows residents, or anyone actually, to make application for overnight parking permission request exception, and that generally, so long as it's a passenger car, because that's the only time that we would allow that by this particular software package to be approved. If anything is different or unusual, like a motorhome or a truck or something like that, where it's necessary to be parked in violation of that restriction, then we would have a supervisor go out and take a look at that to ensure that that vehicle is parked in a manner that ensures safety of vehicles traversing that roadway. So what that also required is that some type of restriction related to how many times a year such a request would be granted. So we put in there right now, I believe it's 4, because we don't have any restriction right now. That's what we're suggesting, is 4, because we only have 4 months. It was 3, now it's 4 months that we've restricted parking in the village of Cary overnight. And again, it would be something as a matter of direction from the village board to advise us what is the proper number in regard to allowing exceptions to this ordinance, as, again, having an ordinance that's you allow exceptions for all the time is an ineffective ordinance. Is that you? Oh, at the end? Okay. I thought we had one more slide, sorry about that. So this is the final slide, and this is a slide that's related to extended parking permit discussion. We had, myself and Administrator Reif had a discussion with legal counsel as it relates to extended parking in regards to the restriction of overnight parking, or any parking for that matter, actually. And the issue really becomes, what's the purpose for that restriction? And then if it's some type of petition, right now we have no such application for a parking permit to allow parking in violation or as an exception to the overnight parking restriction that we have. So we didn't have one before. When a petition was made, we couldn't give an application for that because it didn't exist, number one. But number two, there are issues related certainly to things that we, certainly are foreseeable and unforeseeable as it relates to requests. And under, for example, Mrs. Whistler's request, that is a request that's being made in regards to the Americans with Disabilities Act. Now, what we're proposing here is that the extended parking permit be very specific in regards to when such a request is granted based on criteria that's developed, so that it's not something that is widely granted. And I would look for direction from the board in regards to that. Currently, what we have is issue before us related to medical care, but it's also rolled into this issue related to handicap parking. I would let Director Morimoto discuss the handicap parking a little bit more as it relates to not just the reasonable accommodation to a request, but significant changes in the configuration of the roadway to meet certain standards that are required for a handicap parking spot on a roadway. Do you want to?
So if we're directed to head in that direction, one thing just to consider is that with designated handicap parking, there are certain requirements that have been recommended through the, I believe it's the Justice Department's purview with the ADA Act and the proposed extensions as it would apply to public right-of-way. I don't believe they've been adopted yet, so they are still guidelines, but nonetheless, it would maintain consistency with regards to how handicap accessible parking is configured and permitted. As you know, when you go through a parking lot in on-street parking situations, the configuration, which is dictated under the Illinois Accessibility Code, shows a very specific layout for handicap parking, having a loading zone 8 foot wide and hatched, striped out next to an 8 foot wide parking stall and a specific sign located centered in that space. If you're to propose and implement on-street handicap parking, there is guidelines for how that configuration is made as well. It still has a requirement for that loading zone next to the parking space. So in many cases, when there's non-designated parking, where it's just an open roadway where parking is permitted, but the spaces aren't delineated, we would still have to then implement an accessible curb ramp at the parking space itself, meeting the guideline requirements. Provide that loading space, which would more than likely require moving the curb and an indentation in the curb in the parkway to provide that minimum 5 foot wide loading zone next to the parking stall. So that would be for each space granted. This is one of those considerations that we'll have to make sure that we, if we grant them, that we do grant them and construct them correctly to meet the requirements.
But as we discussed previously here, we will be working with Mrs. Whistler related to her situation on allowing for a permit specifically for a caregiver here, and that's conditions on that permit we're working on right now, and that's been relayed to Mrs. Whistler.
Yeah, I would envision something that was very specific as it relates to, the function that's being performed, medical care, that it would be specific to the location and issued to an individual that has an identified car, and it wouldn't be transferable. It'd be something to that effect, and it would be an application made to an authority within the village, either myself or the village administrator. With that, we entertain comments or questions.
Any discussion or comments for
I had a question regarding Prairie Street. It's on page 4, letter C. It says Prairie Street, both sides from Krenz Avenue north to the end of Prairie Street. When we approved parking on Prairie, I thought we included from West Main to the end of Prairie.
No, actually, the resident there requested that that remain in effect because he had difficulty backing out of his driveway when cars were parked there. So we have it from Krenz to West Main where there's no restriction any longer.
Okay, oh, I see.
Yeah,
It's
so
no parking.
Yeah,
there.
exactly.
Okay.
So it was, that particular resident was, and it's only one person, by the way. It's only
Yes, right.
one garage, and he was very specific in regards to requesting that restriction remain in effect.
One thing, would we be able to amend that to include like midpoint on Prairie Street? So we only allow parking from May 31st, I think it is, to August 31st, or May 1st to August 31st, with those cutouts, and then not allow parking where there aren't any of the cutouts?
I thought we took that, that restriction's no longer in effect, if I remember correctly.
Jeff, where are you? Letter C, number 4?
That's an irrelevant point now, but I'm talking about between Krenz Avenue and Main Street. There's the cutouts there up in front by Main Street, and then it narrows between the Fadden's house and the other house across the street. Would we be able to just put up no parking signs from this point forward, going north after those cutouts? Or after the two driveways that abut, the houses face Main Street, but the driveways are on
Okay,
Prairie Street?
we just, deleted that restriction a couple months ago.
Well, we allowed parking though on both sides,
Correct.
but the full length of the street.
Right.
Prior to that, there was no allowed parking on that part of the whole street.
Correct.
So what I'm saying is, could we amend it now to do half parking just on the two cutouts in the front and not on the back where it's narrow? Do you see what I'm saying?
Right, and yeah, I can understand where, when we initially proposed that, the issue really was, the bus traffic, right? And, traveling in and out of there, and we had suggested restricting on only one side. And, the suggestion or the direction was to unrestrict that parking the whole length of the roadway. So I guess, would that be something that is, desired by the board in regards to making it from, and we would do it by feet, so it'd be, 100 feet south of Krenz. It would be restricted on both sides. Is that what you're asking for then? On both sides?
Krenz and Prairie, right?
Well, it's Prairie,
Prairie Street.
south of
Prairie Street,
Krenz,
but south of,
South,
south of Krenz, like 100 feet or wherever that,
right.
wherever that, in that,
The
in that
cutouts would be
station,
allowed
right,
parking, but where the areas where there aren't cutouts, there'd be no
Narrows.
parking.
right.
Yeah. Where you said past the driveways,
Pardon?
or past the driveway? Past the person who has the cutout just past their driveway?
Correct.
Okay.
Kind of the lot line.
Yeah, where it starts narrowing. I think you guys did a great job, though, trying to get everything corrected and kind of consistent is the key. It's going to make it much more enforceable. Like you said, it's very difficult to enforce something if there's not consistency. So safety is obviously the first priority for everything.
And I will tell you that Director Morimoto, because he has the responsibility of making sure that the signs are maintained, found a number of different restrictions that weren't codified. So now those will be codified, and that is in that section C, like from 33 down, basically, although there might be an exception here and there, where those were already posted restrictions that weren't identified in the ordinance.
So for everyone just maybe listening or just wondering what's going on, so let's say what you're talking about, the exceptions, the 4, you were saying roughly you're suggesting or looking for direction on how many times you can get grants an exception?
Correct.
If I read it correctly, it's, right now you're suggesting 4 times, and that would be for a maximum of 4 nights within those 4 times?
Just 4 times. Well,
Just
yeah,
4 nights total?
correct.
So let's say someone had relatives in for Christmas. They would need to call and get an exception if they couldn't fit everyone in the driveway?
Correct. And it would only be 4 times for that period between
For those 4
December
months.
and the end of March, because we
Okay.
extended it to the end of March
So
now.
4 nights, period.
Correct. And I'll tell you where that comes from. And it wasn't something that we just identified because it was 4 months.
Right.
But in a different municipality where they have restrictions all year round, the number was 10. And again, that's a number that is dictated by policy, so, that was just something that we said, okay, if 10 is good when there's a restriction for 12 months, 4 should be okay for a restriction that's less than half.
And right now, Chief, there isn't anything in there that talks about.
Yeah, and that's the other part of this equation is, although, we've been granting authority to park on the street in violation of this ordinance,
Bless you.
there was never the ability or any delineated authority in the code to allow us to do that. And now that exists, and it exists for both the Public Works Director and then certain members of the Police Department, because those overnight parking restrictions, or if we deny them because there's an anticipated snowfall, they have that authority to not allow the on-street parking.
So what we're trying to do here is, as you can understand and appreciate, clean up the ordinance, and make sure that there's fair certainty for everyone, and it's known.
the only other one I'm hearing from the board about the question is Prairie. Eric, you had pulled that up before, just so everybody knows where that is, so. So you're talking from that one driveway on the east side of the street all the way through the intersection? Is that what you're suggesting?
North.
Yeah.
So yeah, from here, north of the driveways to Krenz, I believe is where trustee Kraus is suggesting. And that point south is where these bump outs in the pavement, where the road widens out slightly,
Right.
is where he's suggesting we would leave what is currently allowed, the whole length of that block, parking on both sides.
I'm fine with that.
I have no problem with that.
I think it's great.
Makes sense. So it's narrow over there to begin with.
It's narrower there, so the options would be to, in that scenario, restrict parking on both sides for that section from the driveway north, or just to one side. Just to throw another ring.
Seabird is like that too, so it has it on one side, so.
Yes.
It's consistent then.
And the other issue with that is that there's no fire hydrants on that block. So there's no, good reason to restrict it on one side or the other. I believe that we had suggested restricting it on the inbound side or the northbound side to the District 26 bus transportation to allow easier access so that they be on the curbside. And then when they come out now, they're stopped at a stop sign and there might be cars parked on both sides, but they'd be able to have a clear line of sight down Main Street when they're trying to emerge from that roadway.
Is there anybody else that aware of any other streets?
Yeah, I just had a comment on item A4 with the athletic fields and all that. I get your change of verbiage here, and I think that's good. My one concern here is that you're restricting everybody in that area between April 1st and October 31st, anybody to park on the street. So my question would be, is that roadway wide enough that we could do one street park, or I'm sorry, not one street, one side parking instead of restrict both sides?
That's what we did. It's on one side. So it'd be either like on Galway Drive north and northwest side from Silver Lake to Galway, and then Ardmore southwest side from Galway to Adair. So it's only restricted on one side,
All right.
except for Adair in front of Deep Park. Then it's not restricted in front of the park.
All right. Good.
And then I have a question for either you or Eric. Do you mind going back to the slide that we talked about with Prairie? So just so I'm in understanding, you guys are going to go halfway down Prairie at the property lines going north up to Krenz for no parking, and then south at the property lines going to Main Street with parking. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think the most logical thing to do would be to start at the edge of the driveway, because you can't park in front of a driveway by statute. So you'd start on that north of the driveways and then go north to Krenz.
Okay.
That seemed, yeah.
Sure, come on up.
So I happen to know the overnight parking statute on the online system fairly well, because I've been utilizing that while we're trying to work out the overnight parking for the nurses. And right now, it is 3 consecutive nights with 1 license plate number, and you can request up to 7 times. So that makes 3 weeks worth of the same license plate number and 3 consecutive nights for 7 times. I would suggest that you do, maybe if you want to reduce it to just 4 days, I think that's a little shy. I think you have college kids coming home that might not have accessibility in the parking for the holidays. You might have relatives coming. So I would suggest, if you're going to limit it less than the 7 consecutive, or the 7 3 consecutives, maybe do it for 2 weeks, the time that, the holiday break or something. Just a suggestion. I think cutting it back to 4 would be, we certainly wouldn't have been able to work with the village with just the 4 nights. So I'm just suggesting, I guess, maybe if you are going to limit it, that you don't drastically limit it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments?
Actually, I do. I'm here with
Could you come up to the microphone, please?
My name is Lori Palmer Kane. I'm with the Lake County Center for Independent Living, and I'm here as an advocate with Kelly. As you're talking about creating a permitting situation for overnight caregivers, I would just ask that you be mindful that most families that have overnight care often have multiple caregivers. So there's going to be multiple people who will need to be permitted. So if you could just kind of keep that in mind as you're creating a situation that's not going to be overly difficult or cumbersome for the family and the caregivers. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments.
Just wanted to bring it up. You guys were talking about limiting parking to one side on those streets over where you had some of them that were already limited and you're extending it. Yeah, keep in mind, there's 2 families over there that have handicapped children that have ramps coming out of their house. So just keep in mind that they might need parking on their side of the street as well. Just throwing that out there. You might want to take a closer look at who your families are that are utilizing that both sides parking. Just a suggestion.
And I think I would add, as we consider this as a whole, the kind of separating out the exceptions, which would be the exemptions, which would be the 4 times per year versus the extended permit. So that, like Chief Finley mentioned, the exemptions are meant to be the isolated cases that aren't common, that just happen once in a while. Because obviously we do need to, from a public works standpoint, I'll selfishly look at that option, that direction, because what you see there in that photo there, it's not a car, but it would have the same results when we have multiple situations where cars are parked throughout the village. In these situations, we get snow, we have to plow around them. We do get the hard pack that forms, the ice dams that will eventually build up if the snow isn't able to be cleared timely and frequently in those spots where the cars are parked. So it could lead to some drainage issues and other matters where those cars would have trouble getting in and out of those spaces as well. So that's a factor why, as a whole, we would, with the exemption process, we'd want that to be the exception to the rule and not the norm. But knowing that there are other circumstances, that's why, again, we're looking at the extended permit process as another option to handle the situations that, again, aren't the norm, but aren't at all frequent when we run into this kind of challenge in our snow operations.
Does the village board have any other questions for staff on this?
I do. I was contacted by a resident about in the Krenz, Silver Lake area, but just about how do we enforce, I mean, when we enforce something like this and the snow removal, about having inoperable cars in driveways that would prohibit additional parking on their own property. Does that something that we look at as well? I just want to make sure that, people that wanted their concerns voiced, that, they're getting some sort of a reasonable response.
Yeah, and I've, again, researched these type of permitting processes, and one option is to go and inspect the garage and the parking situation to ensure that the resident had done everything that they could to accommodate their parking situation before they rely on the village to provide parking for them. So, there could be a mechanism in that regard, although as I envision the extended parking permit situation, it would be the great exception to the rule. There would be specific criteria, because I'm concerned with precedent, right? We treat everyone fairly, number one, and number two, the snowfall restriction is a public safety issue, which is a very valid issue in regards to concern related to, even though, permitting might be allowed, that can't be allowed based on the public safety aspect of that ordinance. So, again, everything's a balancing act, right? Mm-hmm. Everything's a balancing act, and we have to figure out what works for the village of Cary.
Right. Well, we want to be fair and understanding, but we also have neighbors that we're responsible for as well. So, Is there any other discussion or comments on this?
In regards to the overnight parking, if we do allow the parking during winter and the plow comes along, and say she has a nurse's car parked in front, you know, and the plow dumps the snow on the car, are you okay with that? Or, I mean, how would we handle that? I mean, then you're responsible for taking out your car.
Well, I think there's a couple different issues that you have to concern yourself with. Number one is, the snow that's, thrown from the roadway onto the car. I don't know if there's a liability issue related to the village. I'm not sure. Director Muramoto indicated, the issue related to drainage and ice dams forming. And number three is, it's a public safety issue as it relates to the movement of that vehicle, and we can certainly enforce it as the police department, or we could move to have those vehicles removed. I think that those are extreme times that we would have to do that, though.
That's what, as a part of what we talk about here, the conditions. I mean, those are things that we're going to look at. We don't have the, perfect solution right now. We're working on that, and that's been relayed to Ms. Whistler, that there will be some reasonable conditions that the village may place on this, and that's certainly an important point that you bring up, Trustee Kraus, that we will be looking at.
Okay.
And to your point, with the hard pack that could form, the reason we want to get that road scraped as quick as possible is to let the chemicals and the salt do their job. Once it gets too thick and that really hard base of ice forms, it may take a while. We may never get it back to a dry pavement scenario. So there may be that layer of snow and ice in those areas where, if the cars are there for an extended amount of time, we'll have to deal with, which obviously is an inconvenience to the people that are trying to use those spaces as well.
I think as long as we're bringing that up with the snow plow removal and everything, we have a consistent problem where the plows are actually plowing our cars into the driveway as well, because the plows are going through and there's a huge stack of snow that's in front of our driveway. The ambulance cannot get the stretcher through, nor can we get our daughter's wheelchair or stroller through. So if we're going to consider on-street parking and overnight parking and the plow going through, I think you would have to also consider blocking us in our own driveway as it is right now.
That happens to everybody, though.
I understand, but not everybody has an ambulance that comes with a stretcher or has a wheelchair.
Any other comments? What other type of direction are you looking for from the committee? Any other?
Well, we've heard feedback here from the village board this evening, and we're planning to package up an ordinance and bring it to the next meeting. That would be January 16th, so.
Sounds good to me.
All right.
Thank you.
Sorry, I just want to make it clear that, Jacob, you said that our nurses, in the meantime, while you're working on this, are able to park overnight parking.
Correct.
Thank you.
Well, once permits issued, right?
Well,
We'll give a temporary permit.
at this
Correct.
time.
Yeah,
Yes.
I believe in our discussions today, because there's a request based on a reasonable accommodation under the Americans with Disabilities Act, that under that authority, we can grant the temporary permission to park there until we get our ordinance in place.
Correct, yes.
Thank you. On to the next topic is village attorney billing. Jake?
Yeah, we had touched on this a little bit at our last meeting here in the village board session. This was requested to be brought forward for discussion by the committee of the whole. Essentially, this relates to attorney billing regarding the research and work that was done related to the conflicts matter that the village board is aware of. Bringing this forward here to get feedback regarding the approximately $2,900 that have been essentially billed to the village from Ansel Glink here related to the conflicts matter. So looking for feedback from the village board regarding this.
I'd like to hear from Trustee Coster.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Jake. Yeah, I brought this issue forward, and Jake, your $2,900 estimate in my determination falls short, but I'm willing, I didn't want to make this a public issue, but I was forced to do that based on Ansel Glenk is not willing to work with us, to my understanding, on solving this issue. But I cannot sit here as a trustee and approve billing for advice that was legally incorrect. And I voiced my objections over this advice on numerous occasions and was rebuked several times. So what I'm doing here is trying to look out for our citizens and the people here in the village, and as a trustee, that this type of expenditure is not acceptable when you are given advice that is not correct legally. And this is a very black and white issue. So I'm not trying to make this a attack on Julie or Ansel Glenk. I'm asking for cooperation in solving this billing issue, and I hope that we can come to an agreement which makes the taxpayers whole.
Any other comments or discussion on this?
I do agree with that. I was just kind of disappointed. I don't know if are we talking about this during executive session too, or
No.
that we were given advice that was inaccurate. So I kind of felt that paying for advice that wasn't truthful isn't completely.
Well, I I find that it's disheartening to hear the direction you are going with this. We obtained legal advice from our council. We had a letter of complaint about something within our village. And our typical response is that our council will act on our behalf to challenge whatever is done. And I strongly disagree with this. Was not a black and white order or a black and white issue, not at all. In the written opinions that we have gotten, there's a difference of opinion. It's not black and white. So therefore, Ansel Glenk is representing the village in the best capacity that they have. So for us to withdraw a payment because we sent, at the request of the board, Ansel Glenk to answer a complaint, whether it be from somebody from this board or somebody, a resident within the village of Cary, it is our obligation to make sure that the village is represented in a timely manner. And in what the normal course of getting a legal opinion, you're going to have people that are going to have differences of opinion. That's what the legal system's all about. So I find that this is, I'm a little startled that you would want to ask our attorney to refund money for something that the village board asked them to do. Now, if our
Hold
council...
on. The village
May I
board didn't
finish?
ask him to do that.
Well, there was a complaint.
No, now that you said that, I would like you to define that. When did the village board ask her to do anything?
When there is a complaint given...
No. You said the village board directed her.
May I finish?
Yeah,
When the
I would
village
like to know
received-
when the village board
when the-
directed her.
Well, if you let me talk, I'd be happy to. When we received a complaint that there was a concern about a legal motion that was happened at the village, that in turn puts us in jeopardy of this. So we have to provide legal counsel to find out what the exact answer is on these things. And that's exactly what happened. It happens any time that there is a resident or we have a trip and fall or something that comes in, we have to alert our attorneys that this is happening. This was not done on any type of other pretense other than to represent what has already been done at the village.
So here's the deal. July 25th, 2017, there was an original memo from our attorneys on this topic. I objected to that. I said that they're incorrect, and I would like to get a second opinion with a different attorney. I then was outvoted on this board, so I hired my own attorney and paid for my own attorney, who disagreed with the village attorney on this stance. There was a follow-up memo on August 29th concerning this issue, and I cited concerns about billing, as did Trustee McApine. On September 5th,
Calpine.
on September 5th, there was an ethics policy discussion with the village board, which I objected to the billing of. On November 13th, there was a memo to the state's attorney, which was totally off the ranch, off the reservation, because the state's attorney doesn't usually ask for opinions from other attorneys. The state's attorney is the legal, they dictate the law in Illinois. And then, yes, that is true, Julie, and we're going to disagree again. So the fact of the matter is, I'm okay with July 25th, the original memo which Adam and Julie wrote. If you want to bill us for that, I'm okay with it. I objected to it, but that's fine. Bill us for that. August 29th, the follow-up memo, I totally disagree with. September 5th, the ethics policy discussion, I totally disagree with. And the November 13th memo to the state's attorney is totally off the reservation. And the 4.25 hours or 4.5 hours that we're getting billed for that is ridiculous. And like I said, I didn't want to go out here and make this a crusade. All I said to Jake is, I want you to address this with Ansel Glink. And I hope that, being our village attorney, they would be accepting of a compromise. And I compromised at $2,900, which it's way more than that. And I hope they would just eat it. Because they should, because we got bad advice. My own attorney, within $400 of paying him, came to a totally different conclusion. And my next, and I hate to put it this way, because now you forced my hand at this, and I would say to Julie, you know, what did you do to validate your opinion after I objected? What was your follow-up? And I don't even want to do this, Julie, but he's forcing my hand.
I'm forcing your hand?
Yeah.
How am I forcing your hand?
Because you're forcing me to get up here and validate my concerns. And
Well, that's part of our job. We have to validate what your
yeah,
concerns
so
are.
I've already done that through several emails which weren't responded to, and I'm saying to Julie,
Can I just say something here? When village staff looks at invoices here, we assess them of, are they legitimate expenses? And these are legitimate expenses. I understand that you may
Well, wait a
not,
minute.
you may not agree with it.
If
Jim,
we
can I
buy a
finish here?
bad vehicle
Jim,
in the village,
is it
you don't just say
Can you
we're going to pay it.
Is it a legitimate expense? Was the work done? In this case, it is a professional service. The work was done. I understand you don't agree with it here, but this is how, I'm just speaking for village staff, about
That's very disappointing,
how
Jake.
we respond
disappointed in
and
you.
review the bills.
Was the work
Can
done?
you please finish? He's
The
listening to
work
us.
was done on the basis of it was a bad opinion. And my question to Julie is, what did you do to validate your opinion after I objected?
Well, I think that if you've read the opinion that I wrote to the state's attorney and citing the case law, that I did the research. But I wanted to step back
yeah,
because
wait. Can I, since you said that, I need to ask you a question. Did you go back to committee in Springfield and research how this law was created? Did you listen to the discussion of how this bill was created in Springfield?
Yeah, we did look at the legislative history, and I was getting to what I looked at. I also read the cases. I read Attorney General opinions. The opinion was a well-reasoned opinion, and attorneys do disagree. State's attorney does not dictate the law, and I will disagree with you on that. Only a court can. And if you ask the state's attorney, he would agree with what I just said, which is a state's attorney may issue opinions for county officials, doesn't have the authority to issue opinion for municipal officials. He has the authority to bring charges, which the state's attorney has chosen not to do. The state's attorney did not issue an opinion on this particular issue. State's attorney gave his interpretation. But if you asked him, is this the law? He would say, absolutely not, it's not the law. Only a judge or a legislature can make the law. So if two attorneys disagree on an opinion, or if he brought charges, that doesn't mean that it's a done issue. That means that it would go to a court and a judge would make a ruling on that. But I wanted to step back because how this started was there was a challenge to what happened at the village board in taking an action. And my job as the village attorney is to protect the validity of the village's actions. So when the village board takes a vote and that's being challenged, then I have a duty as the village attorney to protect that, to protect the integrity of the process, to defend the village against a challenge. And it really is no different than a court. So if the village got sued or there was a complaint filed, then we would defend it. A judge may rule against us or rule for us, but we have the ethical obligation and part of our duty to defend the village and defend its actions, which is exactly what I did here. So,
But you
and that
chose
is part
sides.
of my duty.
You
And
chose sides.
I did not.
You
I was
did.
protecting the village's action. The village took an action to
No.
approve a grant, and that action was being questioned. And I made it very clear to the state's attorney, and you can ask him this question, that I was appearing on behalf of the village and that I represent the village.
But you
And in my
shouldn't be
memo, I
appearing
talk
on
about
behalf of a
that.
criminal matter.
If the action is overturned, it affects and impacts the integrity of what the village did. And my job is to
Exactly.
protect the village action. And it was taken. And I know you disagree with the opinion, and your attorney does, but
No, I agree with the state's
my
attorney
opinion was
opinion.
consistent
State's
with,
attorney didn't give an opinion.
he didn't. I mean,
did
you
not.
have to
Actually, he
read.
did, but
He
he
gave
didn't.
his interpretation
did.
of a statute, but he did not
He
issue
said
an
this should
opinion.
stop. If it happens again, there will be action taken.
No, he did not say
did
that.
not.
Would you like me to read what he
Yeah,
said?
he did say
Read it.
that.
Read it in.
What he said is
Read
if
it
this
verbatim.
continues, then
Read it verbatim.
At this time, the state's attorney's office offers no opinion as to whether these actions of any part of any Cary trustees related to the resolution funding the Cary Grove Chamber of Commerce contravene section 105/3A through F in its discretion. It is elected not to pursue this matter further. That said, should we be advised of future allegations of violations of section 105/3
future violations.
Can I finish, please?
Yeah,
you
go
know,
ahead.
The interrupting is becoming bothersome. Please be professional about this. That said, should we be advised of future allegations of violations of section 105/3 by any Cary trustee, we may not exhibit similar restraint. He did not say he would. So nowhere in this does he say that he's offering an opinion.
He did. It says here in paragraph 3, after reviewing your reasoning and attendant case, while we respectfully disagree with you guys, in particular, we believe your interpretation controverts the statute's plain language by unduly encumbering section 105/3F with supplemental conditions not set forth by the legislature. And there's a whole paragraph saying why he disagrees with that after that.
But isn't his final offering?
His final offering is that he's saying, who knows, because maybe he backed you in the election or whatever, that he's not going to go ahead and,
Jennifer, I cannot believe that you would even say this.
I don't know why he's not going to go
You're
ahead.
making this a political thing? Oh, my gosh.
Oh,
That's-
completely crazy for me to even say that, but I don't know.
That's an
If
understatement.
somebody's violating the law, I don't know why they don't do
He's a
something about it.
trusted elected official who is the highest ranking legal opinion we have in our county. And for you to accuse him of backing me for something, that's not true at all. And that's a reprehensible comment. I find that really offensive, Jennifer. I
I
really
find
do.
what you're doing offensive as well, because you're not citing the entire letter here. You're just picking out the last paragraph where he says that he's not going to go ahead and he's going to use his discretion to not go ahead and pursue this at this time. If anything in the future happens, he's going to go ahead and do something probably about it, but not at this time. So
Right, so
I think what it
that's-
says if future allegations are made. That doesn't, maybe someone never made a future allegation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean,
I
I'm
think
just
we're
answering the
talking about
questions that you
billing
asked.
and
we are,
billing
but
of Ansel Link and.
correct.
This
but
is all
you-
related to
You
that.
have to go
Yeah,
back
it is
to.
related, but
Let's take a step back a minute. Everyone take a deep breath, okay? Just stay calm. If anyone should be a little stressed, it should be me, because it's really about me.
no, it's
So-
about you and the mayor.
No, it's really about me.
It's about both of you.
Oh,
Because
whatever.
the law is the law.
Okay. The bottom line is, what you're saying, that you don't feel that Ansel Blink should be paid, and what I'm hearing, and maybe I'm wrong, and correct me if I'm wrong, if there would have been a different opinion, then you'd be okay with paying them. But because they contradicted what you felt, then you feel that they don't deserve to be paid, but they did indeed do the work.
No.
So it would be,
Some
just
of
hear me out. I was very quiet when you spoke, so I expect the same respect, please. When we've had our attorneys have to do things like research things on mayoral appointments numerous times, since I've been on the board 3 times, and you've been on the board the same time 3 times, and you've asked for an addition. We don't go back and say, hey, you researched this already, we're not gonna pay you. In addition to that, we've had our village attorney and staff do a lot of work, like say for a village, whether we wanted a solicitation ordinance. The bottom line is we never enacted one. You don't go back and say, because we didn't do that, we're not gonna pay you for the work. The bottom line is they did the work. The bottom line is that if the state's attorney felt that I should be charged with a felony, as you put in your last email to the board, basically,
I didn't
then
say that.
you sure did. I can read it, the one that you sent out on
Read
Friday
it.
night.
Read it.
Okay. So your comment was, or in your first thing it says, there were violations of state statutes, conviction of which would be a felony.
That's true.
No,
Violations
there
of
were
those
not-
state
okay.
statutes is a felony.
Absolutely, but you're
That's
saying,
true.
you're stating
Thank
as
you.
if there were, no, you're stating as if there were.
Violations of those state statutes is a felony,
Okay, Jim,
period.
if the
I did
if
not
the
lie.
state's
I do
attorney.
not lie. I have never been proven to lie, and you have
Jim,
not
I'm
been
not
able
gonna-
to
that's
prove
not- I'm
that
not
I've ever
looking-
lied.
I'm not
So,
looking to do that.
violation of those statutes is a law.
Stop. What I'm talking about is that when we hire someone to do a job, they deserve to be paid for that job.
If they
Period.
do it correctly,
But there's,
Hold on, just a minute.
by the law,
okay, but the bottom
the
line
law. That's what rules here, the
Jim,
law.
Jim,
Okay.
the law did not charge anything. Am I being charged with
Yet,
something?
at this
Yet.
time.
Okay, I'm pretty sure this is put to rest. Julie,
I
am
don't
I
know. You
incorrect
know
by that
something I
letter?
don't know?
No, I'm just saying the letter that he said is that
I
he
don't know.
pursues not to. Okay, Jim, you're being very combative, and I don't understand that. The state's attorney issued an opinion that said that he is not looking to pursue this matter.
That's a state
And that
attorney.
Okay, but that's what you're complaining about, the fact that we had an attorney go and represent the village in front of the state's attorney.
No,
You don't
it's
feel
not.
that those charges were valid because it was bad advice. So help me out.
What I said.
I'm simple-minded. Help me out understand.
What I said is I'm okay with the charges on July 25th, that henceforth, after I offered reasonable objections to the statements that council made, then henceforth, those charges should be dismissed. The memo from July 25th, that's fine. I'm okay with paying for that, even though I objected to it. But the memo from August 29th, the ethics policy discussion from September 5th, and the memo to the state's attorney on November 13th, I am not okay with paying for.
Okay, let's get back to what the item at hand is. Here's the $2,900 for the work that I believe the work has been done, and our attorneys need to be compensated for the work they do to represent the village of Cary. There's an accusation or a complaint filed, we need to act on it. Regardless of where the complaint comes from, our legal team goes to work on our behalf. So the question is right now is, do we want to withhold payment from Ansel Gling for the $2,900? Obviously, Jim is a no. Trustee McAlpine,
Yes, I think we should pay them. So no, I do not want to withhold it.
Trustee Kraus,
And that they did the work.
Yes, we should pay them.
Trustee Betts,
Yes, we should pay them.
Trustee Weinhammer,
No, and just going back to this too, it says first, the case law cited is inapplicable. In
Jennifer,
the
we've
attorney's
moved
letter.
on from that, please.
Yeah, I can still go ahead and comment on it, so it's fine for me to still make a comment on it, all right? I'm so tired of you guys just being rude to each other too. Let's all laugh about it, it's oh so funny, right? So I'm just sitting here and I'd like to just finish my thought here, because you guys are talking, I'm just gonna finish my thought. No, I don't, especially when it says first, the case law that was cited is inapplicable. Basically, it's frustrating for me, I'm not even involved in this, okay? But it's just frustrating for me to read this letter and to realize that we got bad legal advice about this, in my opinion. You guys can have a
Thank you.
different opinion, but
Thank you
this
for
is
clarifying that.
my opinion.
Thank you.
You don't need to be rude about it. I'm not
I
trying to be rude
understand,
to
I
you.
understand.
So
I
there's no need to
appreciate
be
your
rude.
opinion. I'm saying,
Right,
I
thanks,
appreciate
Mark.
your, okay. Trustee Cavalli, are you still around?
I am. The part I'm struggling with all this is I think a lot of this could have been avoided. Trustee Kostler did ask to have an opinion from his attorney, and I know that I voted in favor of that because I wanted to hear that, but he was ultimately voted down on that. So I do think a lot of this could have been avoided, in my opinion. So I will agree that we should withhold.
All right, well, I think that we should pay, and that the consensus is 4-3 to reimburse our attorneys. All right, thank you. I will entertain a motion to adjourn into executive session to discuss closed session minutes for review, Illinois 120/2C21, and real estate purchase or lease by Illinois 122C5.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye. Oh, wait,
Opposed?
that's a roll call.
Oh, can we do,
You can just do a roll call now.
okay,
Sorry,
roll call, please.
closed session.
Kostler,
Yes.
McAlpine,
Yes.
Kraus,
Yes.
Betts,
Yes?
Weinhammer,
Yes.
Cavelli.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, we will adjourn.